Your time is up.
The sound of Melissa's laughter cut through the ambient jazz like a knife through silk. Ethan Cole watched his wife lean closer to Ryan Blake, her manicured fingers brushing against his forearm as she threw her head back in exaggerated delight. The wine bar's dim lighting cast shadows across their faces, but nothing could hide the way she looked at him. "You're absolutely terrible," Melissa giggled, her wedding ring catching the candlelight as her hand lingered on Ryan's muscled arm. "I can't believe you just said that about Peterson's presentation." Ryan grinned, his perfectly white teeth gleaming. "What can I say? I call it like I see it. Unlike some people, I don't pretend everything's sunshine and rainbows just to keep the peace." The jab was obvious. Ethan felt the familiar tightness in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. He'd learned over the years that reacting only gave Melissa more ammunition. Instead, he took a slow sip of his Cabernet and continued observing. "That's what I love about you," Melissa purred, her voice dropping to that husky tone she used to use with him. "You say what you mean. No filters, no walking on eggshells." "Life's too short for that," Ryan replied, his eyes fixed on Melissa's lips. "Some guys spend their whole lives playing it safe, never taking what they really want." Ethan's grip tightened imperceptibly on his wineglass. The financial advisor in him had learned to read people, to see through their facades and understand their true motivations. Ryan Blake wasn't subtle about his intentions. Neither was Melissa. "Speaking of taking what you want," Melissa said, her voice carrying just loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear, "I have to ask you something." Ryan leaned in closer, his cologne mixing with her perfume in a sickeningly familiar way. "Yeah?" Melissa glanced over at Ethan with a look that could have been pity or contempt. Then she turned back to Ryan, her smile radiant and cruel. "If I'd met you before my husband, I never would have married him." The words hung in the air like smoke from a tool. Conversations at nearby tables seemed to pause. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach, not from shock, but from recognition. This was it, the line she'd been building toward for months. Ryan's smirk widened as he glanced at Ethan with undisguised satisfaction. "Well, lucky for me, some guys just don't know how to hold on to what they have." He paused, letting his gaze drift back to Melissa's cleavage. "I don't think he'd bother us anyway." The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds. Then Ethan's fist connected with Ryan's jaw. The crack of knuckles against bone echoed through the suddenly silent wine bar. Ryan's chair toppled backward as he crashed to the floor, his hand flying to his already swelling jaw. Melissa's wine glass shattered against the hardwood as she jerked back in shock. "What the hell?" she screamed, her voice shrill enough to make the bartender look up from polishing glasses. "Have you lost your mind?" Ethan flexed his fingers, surprised at how good it felt. He'd never touched anyone before, not even in high school. The satisfaction was immediate and pure. Ryan struggled to his feet, his face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "You crazy son of a—" "Finish that sentence," Ethan said quietly, his voice carrying a warning Ryan had never heard before. "Please." Something in Ethan's tone made Ryan step back. The cocky finance bro who bench-pressed 250 and bragged about his conquests suddenly looked uncertain. Melissa shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "If you're unhappy, the door's right there, you jealous, entitled loser." Her voice rose with each word, drawing stares from every corner of the bar. "I was having a conversation with a friend and you turn it into some caveman display." Ethan looked at her, really looked. The woman he'd married 7 years ago had been beautiful, yes, but there had been something else. Warmth, maybe? Intelligence? A laugh that made him want to earn it again and again. This woman screaming at him with mascara threatening to run down her cheeks was a stranger wearing his wife's face. "Are you even listening to me?" Melissa shrieked. "Say something! Defend yourself." But Ethan said nothing. He reached into his wallet, pulled out 3 20s, and placed them carefully on the table next to the broken wine glass, enough to cover their drinks and the mess. Always practical, even now. Ryan was holding his jaw, glaring at Ethan with the kind of impotent fury that came with being humiliated in public. "This isn't over, Cole." Ethan almost smiled. "No, it's not." He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps steady and measured. Behind him, Melissa's voice grew more hysterical. "Don't you dare walk away from me! Ethan! Ethan!" Other patrons were openly staring now. Someone had their phone out, probably recording. Ethan could hear the whispers starting, the excited buzz of people who'd just witnessed drama worth talking about for weeks. "Ma'am, please lower your voice," the manager approached, his hands raised peacefully. "We don't want to disturb—" "I'll disturb whoever I want," Melissa snapped. "My husband just attacked someone." Ethan paused at the door and looked back. Melissa stood in the middle of the bar like an actress on a stage, all eyes on her. She'd always loved an audience. The realization settled over him with perfect clarity. She was exactly where she wanted to be. Ryan was back on his feet now, trying to salvage his dignity by straightening his designer shirt and running a hand through his carefully styled hair. But his jaw was already darkening with what would be a spectacular bruise, and everyone in the bar had seen him go down. "This is insane," Ryan muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Complete psycho behavior." Ethan pushed open the door and stepped into the November night. The cold air hit his face like a wake-up call, sharp and clean after the wine bar's stifling atmosphere. He could still hear Melissa's voice through the glass, but the words no longer mattered. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole smiled, really smiled, as he walked to his car. The apartment felt different when Ethan returned. Not empty. Melissa wouldn't be home for hours, if at all, but somehow lighter. He moved through the familiar rooms with new eyes, seeing them not as a home, but as a stage where he'd been playing a role for too long. He went to the bedroom closet and pulled down the leather duffel bag they'd bought for their honeymoon in Italy. Melissa had complained it was too masculine, not stylish enough for their hotels. Now it seemed perfect. Ethan packed methodically. 2 weeks' worth of clothes, folded with military precision. His laptop, important documents, the watch his father had given him for his college graduation. He left the wedding gifts, the photos, the accumulated debris of 7 years pretending to be someone he wasn't. The process was almost meditative. Each item he chose to take or leave behind felt like a small decision about who he really was underneath the accommodating husband he'd become. The expensive suits Melissa had picked out, left hanging. The comfortable jeans she'd mocked as suburban dad wear, packed. In the bathroom, he took only the essentials. His electric razor, the cologne he'd worn before meeting Melissa, the one she'd replaced with something more sophisticated. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. When had his shoulders gotten so straight? When had that determined set appeared around his eyes? His phone buzzed, a text from Melissa. "Where are you?" He deleted it without responding and went to his office. The computer hummed to life, displaying the desktop wallpaper Melissa had chosen, some abstract art piece that looked like a headache. Ethan opened his secure folder and began pulling files. Bank statements, investment portfolios, business documents. Information Melissa had never shown interest in learning about. It was funny, in a way. She'd married him thinking he was safe, predictable, financially stable, but not ambitious enough to ever overshadow her. What she'd never bothered to discover was exactly how successful her boring husband had become. His phone buzzed again. "Ryan's jaw might be broken. I'm at the ER with him. We need to talk." Ethan stared at the message for a long moment, then laughed, actually laughed, as he deleted it. She was at the emergency room with another man, and somehow this was still his fault. The audacity was almost admirable. He opened his contact list and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in months. Nina answered on the second ring. "Ethan, it's almost midnight. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." His voice was steadier than it had been in years. "Actually, everything's finally right." "Okay." His sister's wariness came through clearly. "Want to elaborate?" "I need you to do something for me tomorrow." "Something important." This sounds ominous. Ethan pulled up another file on his computer, one he'd been building for longer than he cared to admit. Security footage, financial records, communication logs. The careful documentation of a man who'd learned not to trust. "Remember what you used to tell me about Melissa?" he asked. Nina was quiet for a moment. "Which part?" "There was a lot. That someday she'd push too far, and I'd have to decide what kind of man I really was." "Ethan, what happened tonight?" he told her, keeping his voice level and factual. The wine bar, the public humiliation, the way Melissa had performed for her audience. When he finished, Nina was silent for nearly 30 seconds. "Jesus," she finally said. "Are you okay? I'm better than I've been in years." He minimized the computer files and leaned back in his chair. "But I need your help with something, a delivery." "What kind of delivery?" Ethan looked around the office one more time. At the wedding photo on his desk where Melissa's smile looked radiant and his looked slightly stunned. At the degrees on the wall that she'd never bothered to read. At the life he'd built while she'd been busy undermining it. The kind that changes everything, he said, and began explaining exactly what he needed Nina to do. Nina arrived at Ethan's downtown apartment at 8 the next morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee and the expression of someone who'd spent the night processing disturbing information. She found her brother in his kitchen, looking more alert than he had any right to after the previous evening's events. "You look terrible," she lied, settling into one of his minimalist bar stools. "Thanks for coming." Ethan accepted the coffee gratefully. "I know this is weird." "Weird doesn't begin to cover it." Nina studied his face, looking for signs of a breakdown or manic episode. Instead, she saw something that reminded her of their father, a quiet intensity that meant serious business. "When you called last night, I thought maybe you'd finally snapped. Maybe I have." "No." Nina shook her head. "Snapping would be calling her names, begging her to come back, or drinking yourself into a coma. This?" She gestured at the neat apartment, her brother's calm demeanor, the organized stack of documents on the counter. "This is planning." Ethan smiled, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. "You always did know me better than anyone, which is why I know you're about to ask me to do something that would make Mom roll over in her grave. Actually, I think Mom would approve." Ethan pulled a thick manila envelope from a drawer. She never liked Melissa. Mom was polite about Melissa. Mom called her that girl who thinks she's performing in a play where everyone else forgot their lines. Nina nearly choked on her coffee. She did not say that. Word for word. "Christmas dinner, 2019. You were in the kitchen arguing with Dad about politics." The memory hit Nina with surprising force. Their mother had always been diplomatically supportive of Ethan's marriage, but there had been moments, small comments, raised eyebrows, the way she'd changed the subject when Melissa dominated conversations. "What's in the envelope?" Nina asked. Ethan handed it to her. "Everything she needs to understand her new situation." Nina opened it carefully and found herself looking at legal documents, financial statements, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline with accompanying photographs. Her eyes widened as she processed the information. "Ethan, how long have you been putting this together?" 2 years, maybe 3. He sat down across from her. "I kept hoping I wouldn't need it." The photographs were damning in their casual cruelty. Melissa flirting with waiters, contractors, the mailman, screenshots of social media posts she'd later deleted, bank statements showing purchases Ethan had never questioned, expensive dinners he hadn't attended, hotel charges when she was supposedly visiting friends. "She doesn't know about any of your real assets," Nina said, reading through financial documents. "The investment portfolio, the business holdings. She knows I'm comfortable. She doesn't know I'm wealthy." Ethan's voice carried no pride, just statement of fact. "She married a safe financial advisor. She never bothered to ask what kind of financial advisor." Nina looked at her younger brother, really looked at him. The shy, accommodating man who'd let his wife make all the social decisions, who'd smiled and nodded through years of subtle put-downs and public dismissals. That man was gone. In his place sat someone she recognized from their childhood, back when Ethan used to build elaborate Lego structures and explain exactly how each piece served the overall design. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "I need you to deliver this to the apartment at exactly 9 a.m. tomorrow. Melissa will be hungover, probably still in last night's dress. She'll be expecting me to come crawling back with apologies." And instead, Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her a video file. "Instead, she's going to learn that her safe, boring husband has been paying attention all along." Nina watched the first few seconds of the video and felt her stomach drop. It was Ethan, but not the Ethan she knew. This version was confident, direct, and completely calm as he began laying out facts that would destroy Melissa's comfortable world. "You're really doing this," she said. "I'm really doing this." "And you're sure?" "Because once this starts, there's no taking it back." Ethan stood up and walked to the window overlooking the city. 7 years of marriage, and Melissa had never once visited this apartment he'd bought as an investment. She'd never asked about his work beyond whether his paycheck would clear. She'd built her life on assumptions about who he was and what he was capable of. "Nina," he said without turning around, "do you remember what Dad used to say about chess?" That it's not about the pieces you take, it's about the moves your opponent doesn't see coming. Exactly. Ethan faced her with the same expression he'd worn as a 12-year-old beating adults at chess tournaments. Melissa has been playing checkers. She's about to learn I've been playing chess all along. Melissa Cole stumbled out of the emergency room at 2:17 a.m., her heels clicking unevenly on the concrete as she fought to maintain her balance. 3 hours of waiting, paperwork, and Ryan's increasingly dramatic complaints about his probably broken jaw had left her exhausted and irritated. "It's just bruised," she muttered, digging through her purse for her car keys. Drama queen. Ryan had become insufferable once the x-rays confirmed no fracture, alternating between threats of legal action and wounded masculine pride. The confident man who'd flirted with her all evening had devolved into a whining sufferer, and Melissa found herself missing the husband she'd publicly humiliated just hours earlier. At least Ethan had balls, she thought, then immediately pushed the observation away. This was his fault. All of it. Her phone showed 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. She scrolled through them with growing annoyance. Friends wanting gossip, co-workers who'd heard through the grapevine, her mother asking if she was handling her marriage properly. But nothing from Ethan. The lack of contact should have been concerning. In 7 years of marriage, Ethan had never gone more than an hour without responding to her messages. But Melissa was too drunk and too proud to read the silence correctly. She drove home slowly, practicing the speech she'd give him. How his jealousy and violence had embarrassed her. How he needed anger management and couples therapy. How she was the sufferer in this situation, not the woman who'd spent the evening eye-screwing another man in public. By the time she reached their brownstone, Melissa had convinced herself that Ethan would be waiting up, probably with flowers and apologies. He always came around eventually. That was what made him safe, predictable, forgiving, willing to smooth over any conflict rather than face confrontation. She climbed the front steps unsteadily, fumbling with her keys. The porch light was on, but the rest of the house was dark. Good. Let him sleep badly on the couch while she took the bedroom. A little punishment would do him good. The front door opened to silence. No anxious husband waiting in the hallway, no defensive explanations echoing from the living room. Just the grandfather clock in the foyer ticking away the early morning hours. "Ethan?" she called out, dropping her purse on the entry table. "I know you're awake." No response. Melissa climbed the stairs, gripping the banister for balance. Their bedroom door was closed, but no light showed underneath. She pushed it open and found the bed empty, still made from that morning. Ethan's nightstand was cleared of his usual items: phone charger, reading glasses, the business biography he'd been working through. A cold finger of unease traced down her spine. She checked his closet and found gaps where his favorite clothes had been. His toiletries were missing from the bathroom. The leather duffel bag they'd argued about buying was gone. "Son of a witch," she whispered, then louder. "Son of a witch." She stumbled back downstairs, her rage building with each step. How dare he run away like some passive-aggressive teenager? How dare he make her the villain when he was the one who'd thrown a punch? In the kitchen, she found a bottle of wine and poured herself a generous glass, not caring that it was nearly 3 a.m. She'd call him, demand he come home, make him understand that marriage meant working through problems instead of running away like a coward. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. On the fourth attempt, she left a message. "Ethan, this is ridiculous. I don't know what game you think you're playing, but it ends now. Come home so we can discuss this like adults, and bring an apology for that stunt you pulled at the wine bar." She hung up and immediately called again. This time, she didn't bother with civility. "I'm not going to chase you around the city begging for forgiveness when you're the one who lost control. You embarrassed me, you embarrassed yourself, and you probably gave Ryan grounds for attack charges. The least you can do is face the consequences instead of hiding wherever you're hiding." By 4 a.m., she'd left 8 increasingly hostile voicemails and finished half the wine bottle. The house felt too quiet, too big, too empty. Ethan's absence had created a vacuum that her anger couldn't fill. She passed out on the living room couch, still wearing her dress from the wine bar, mascara smeared across her face, her wedding ring catching the early morning light streaming through the windows. The sound of the doorbell cut through Melissa's booze-induced stupor like a fire alarm. She bolted upright on the couch, momentarily disoriented, her head pounding and her mouth tasting like she'd been chewing on cotton balls soaked in regret. The digital clock on the cable box read 9:03 a.m. The doorbell rang again, followed by insistent knocking. "Coming," she croaked, struggling to her feet. Her dress from the previous night was wrinkled beyond salvation, and she could only imagine what her hair looked like. But whoever was at the door could wait while she made herself presentable. Except they couldn't, apparently. The knocking continued, urgent and professional. Melissa stumbled to the front door and peered through the peephole. A woman in a crisp business suit stood on the porch, holding a large manila envelope and checking her phone with the impatience of someone on a schedule. "Delivery for Melissa Cole," the woman called out. "I need a signature." "Can you come back later?" Melissa's voice came out rougher than she'd intended. "This isn't a good time." "Ma'am, I was specifically instructed to deliver this at 9 a.m. sharp." "It's urgent." Something about the woman's tone made Melissa's stomach clench. She opened the door partway, trying to shield her disheveled appearance. The delivery woman was young, professional, and clearly trying not to stare at Melissa's obvious hangover. "Melissa Cole?" "Yes." "I need to see ID, please." "For a delivery?" "Yes, ma'am. This is a legal document delivery." "Very specific instructions." Melissa's hands shook slightly as she retrieved her driver's license from her purse. The delivery woman checked it carefully, made a note on her clipboard, and handed over the envelope along with an electronic signature pad. "Sign here, please." The envelope was heavier than expected, with her name printed in block letters across the front. Below her name, in smaller text, "Personal and confidential, to be opened immediately." "Who sent this?" Melissa asked, but the delivery woman was already walking back to her car. Melissa closed the door and stared at the envelope. No return address, no law firm letterhead, nothing to indicate its origin. But something about its weight and formality made her reluctant to open it. She needed coffee first, and aspirin, and maybe a shower to wash away the events of the previous night. But as she walked toward the kitchen, her eyes kept drifting back to the envelope on the entry table. The coffee maker gurgled to life, and Melissa caught her reflection in the chrome surface. She looked like hell, makeup smeared, hair matted on one side, dress stained with wine and regret. This wasn't how she'd planned to spend her Saturday morning. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment her heart lifted, hoping it was Ethan finally ready to apologize. Instead, it was from Ryan. "Jaw feels better today. Still can't believe your husband sucker punched me. Are you okay? Want to grab brunch and talk about what happens next?" Melissa stared at the message, irritation replacing hope. Ryan's concern felt performative, like he was already positioning himself as her supportive friend in the aftermath of her marriage troubles. The attention should have been flattering, but something about it felt hollow. She poured her coffee and returned to the living room, the envelope seeming to grow larger with each passing moment. Finally, curiosity won over apprehension. She tore open the seal and dumped the contents onto the coffee table. What she found made her coffee cup slip from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in an explosion of ceramic and caffeine. The USB drive was small, black, and innocent-looking as it sat among the scattered papers on Melissa's coffee table. But the note attached to it made her hands tremble as she read, "Melissa, everything you need to understand your new reality is on this drive. Plug it into the TV. Watch it all. We'll talk after." The formal tone was wrong. Ethan didn't write like that, cold, distant, clinical. This sounded like business correspondence, not a message from her husband of 7 years. With shaking fingers, she gathered the other papers. Financial documents she didn't recognize, legal forms with language too complex to process in her hungover state, and what appeared to be a timeline with dates, locations, and photographs. Her stomach dropped as she recognized herself in the images, flirting with the contractor who'd renovated their kitchen last spring, getting too close to her personal trainer during sessions Ethan had paid for, laughing with the wine bar's sommelier while Ethan waited in the car. The photographs weren't invasive or voyeuristic. They were documentary evidence, carefully cataloged and dated. Each one showed her in situations that would look innocent individually, but formed a damning pattern when viewed together. "What the hell?" she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She remembered each moment captured in the photos. At the time, they'd felt like harmless flirtation, little confidence boosts that made her feel desired and attractive. Now, viewed through an outside lens, they looked like something else entirely. She fumbled with the TV remote, her fingers clumsy with anxiety and booze remnants. The USB drive slid into the port with a soft click that sounded ominous in the silent house. The screen went black for a moment, then displayed a simple menu with a single video file. From Melissa, play me. She clicked play and immediately saw Ethan's face filling the screen. But this wasn't the Ethan she knew, the accommodating husband who apologized for everything and avoided confrontation. This man looked directly into the camera with steady eyes and spoke in a voice she'd never heard before. Hello, Melissa? If you're watching this, it means you've received the documents that explain your new situation. I want you to understand that what happens next isn't revenge. It's simply the natural consequence of choices you made. The video cut to footage she recognized from the previous night. The wine bar, seen from an angle that captured everything. Her hand on Ryan's arm, her dismissive glances at Ethan, the moment she'd said she never would have married him. But there was more footage, from other nights, other situations where she'd humiliated him in public while he smiled and said nothing. For 3 years, I've been documenting your behavior, Ethan's voice continued over the montage. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I needed to understand who you really are versus who you pretend to be when you want something from me. Melissa's mouth went dry. 3 years. He'd been watching, recording, cataloging her worst moments for 3 years, while she'd assumed he was too passive to notice or too weak to care. The footage shifted to scenes she didn't remember. Ethan installing small security cameras, adjusting angles, reviewing footage on his laptop while she slept. The methodical nature of it was chilling. I want to show you something else, video Ethan said, and the screen filled with financial documents. These are my actual assets, Melissa. The investments you never asked about, the business ventures you dismissed as boring. The inheritance you assumed was modest. Numbers filled the screen. Account balances, stock portfolios, real estate holdings. Melissa's hangover vanished instantly as she processed what she was seeing. The figures were staggering, multiples of what she'd assumed Ethan was worth. You married a man you thought was safe and financially stable, but not ambitious. What you actually married was someone who learned early in life that the best way to protect yourself is to let people underestimate you. The video cut back to Ethan's face, and for the first time, he smiled. Not the apologetic, peacekeeping smile she was used to, but something sharp and satisfied. Now let me explain what's about to happen to your comfortable life. First, Ethan's image continued with the same unsettling calm. Let's discuss Ryan Blake and his immediate future. The screen shifted to what appeared to be corporate documents, personnel files, email communications, and disciplinary records. Melissa recognized the letterhead of Blake & Associates, the investment firm where Ryan worked. Ryan doesn't know this yet, but I own a controlling interest in his company. I acquired the shares through a subsidiary investment group about 18 months ago. His employment contract includes a very specific morality clause regarding conduct that could bring negative attention to the firm. Video footage from the wine bar appeared again, this time showing Ryan's aggressive behavior, his dismissive comments about Ethan, and the moment he suggested Ethan wouldn't bother them anyway. The audio was crystal clear. This footage, along with documentation of his pattern of pursuing married women at company events, constitutes a clear violation of Section 12.3 of his employment agreement. His termination paperwork was filed electronically at 8 a.m. this morning. Security has already cleared out his office. Melissa's hand flew to her mouth. Ryan's job, his 6-figure salary, his corporate expense account, his entire professional identity, gone with the click of a button. She remembered his cocky confidence, his expensive suits, his assumption that he could take whatever he wanted. By now, he'd be sitting in his apartment, staring at a termination letter and trying to figure out how his life had imploded overnight. But that's just the beginning, video Ethan continued. Let's talk about your situation, Melissa. New documents appeared on screen. Their joint bank accounts, credit card statements, and most damning of all, receipts for purchases she'd forgotten making. Expensive dinners charged to cards Ethan paid off. Hotel stays in the city when she'd claimed to be visiting friends. Shopping sprees that coincided with her girls' weekends. I've been covering your lies for so long, I started to wonder if you'd forgotten you were telling them, Ethan said, his tone almost conversational. The restaurant charges from nights you said you were working late. The hotel bills from weekends you were supposedly with Sarah or Jennifer. The patterns became quite clear once I started paying attention. Melissa felt sick. She'd been so careful, so sure Ethan was too trusting to check her stories. But here was evidence that he'd been quietly verifying every lie, documenting every deception, building a case like the financial investigator he actually was. Now, about our assets, Ethan continued, and the screen filled with legal documents. You'll find the prenuptial agreement we signed is quite comprehensive. I know you didn't read it carefully. You were too excited about the wedding to focus on legal details. But your attorney at the time assured you it was standard and fair. Melissa's prenup appeared on screen, highlighted sections showing exactly what she was entitled to in case of divorce. The amount was shockingly small compared to what she now knew Ethan was worth. She'd signed it 7 years ago without question, confident that she'd never need it and that Ethan's assets were modest anyway. Under the terms of our agreement, and given the documented evidence of your emotional affair and dishonesty, you'll be leaving the marriage with exactly what you brought into it: your personal belongings, your car, and the $50,000 from your savings. Account at the time of our wedding: $50,000. Melissa stared at the figure in horror. She'd become accustomed to a lifestyle that cost more than that every few months. The house, the credit cards, the country club membership, all of it was tied to Ethan's income and assets. I know this comes as a shock, Video Ethan said, and his expression almost looked sympathetic. You built your life assuming I'd always be the forgiving husband, the one who'd rather keep the peace than rock the boat. And for a long time you were right. But people change, Melissa. They evolve. They reach points where staying the same becomes more painful than changing everything. The video paused on Ethan's face, and Melissa realized she was looking at a stranger. This calculated, strategic man was nothing like the husband she thought she'd married. Or maybe the thought was worse. Maybe this was who he'd always been, and she'd simply never bothered to pay attention. Her phone buzzed with a text message. With trembling fingers, she checked it, hoping against hope that it was all some elaborate joke, that Ethan would apologize for scaring her and they could work things out. Instead, the message was from a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Cole, this is Peterson Law Offices. We have been retained by your husband to handle divorce proceedings. Please expect our call Monday morning to schedule your deposition. The phone slipped from her numb fingers as the full scope of her situation crashed over her. Ethan hadn't just left. He'd orchestrated a complete demolition of her life with the precision of an engineer and the patience of a chess master. Melissa sat frozen on her couch, staring at the black TV screen where Ethan's face had been moments before. The USB drive contained more files. She could see them in the menu, but she couldn't bring herself to continue watching. The first video had been enough to shatter her understanding of reality. Her phone rang, making her jump. The caller ID showed Ryan's name, and despite everything, she felt a flutter of hope. Maybe they could figure this out together. Maybe... Melissa! Ryan's voice was tight with panic. What the hell is going on? I just got fired. They said it was related to conduct violations and mentioned something about married women. Do you know anything about this? Melissa's voice cracked. Ethan owns your company. He had you fired. Silence, then. What do you mean he owns my company? Your husband is a financial advisor. A nobody. He's not a nobody. The words felt strange coming out of her mouth. I don't know what he is, but he's not what I thought. This is insane. I'm calling my lawyer. You can't just fire someone for talking to a married woman. There are laws. Ryan, Melissa interrupted. He has video footage of everything. Us at the bar, you saying Ethan wouldn't bother us, me saying I never would have married him. It's all documented. Ryan went quiet again. When he spoke, his voice had lost its confident edge. How much footage? I don't know. Years worth, apparently. Melissa looked at the stack of photographs on her coffee table. He's been watching me for 3 years. Recording everything. Jesus Christ. Ryan's breathing was audible through the phone. What kind of sick... The kind who pays attention when his wife humiliates him publicly, Melissa said, surprised by her own words. Where had that come from? Are you defending him after what he did to my face? Melissa touched her own cheek reflexively. Your face is fine, Ryan. It was bruised, not broken. That's not the point. He attacked me. And you were flirting with his wife in front of him. The words kept coming, each one stripping away another layer of the story she'd been telling herself. We both were. Melissa, whose side are you on here? The question hung in the air. Whose side was she on? 24 hours ago, the answer would have been automatic. But now, sitting in her living room surrounded by evidence of her husband's methodical planning, she wasn't sure she had a side anymore. I have to go, she said, and hung up before Ryan could respond. The house felt impossibly quiet. Outside, she could hear normal Saturday morning sounds, neighbors mowing lawns, children playing, the world continuing as if her life hadn't just imploded. She looked around the living room, really seeing it for the first time in years. Every piece of furniture had been chosen by Ethan. The expensive couch she was sitting on, the coffee table now covered with damning documents, the artwork on the walls, all of it reflected his taste, his money, his quiet influence on their life together. She'd lived in his world while thinking she was creating their world. Her phone buzzed with another text, this one from her mother. Heard about last night from Jennifer's daughter. Are you handling your marriage properly? Call me. Handling her marriage properly, as if there were rules she'd failed to follow, protocols she'd ignored. Maybe there were. Maybe the protocol was not publicly humiliating your spouse, not flirting with other men while wearing his ring, not taking his kindness for weakness and his patience for stupidity. Melissa walked to the kitchen and stared at the coffee stain on the floor where she'd dropped her mug. The broken ceramic had been swept up, but the dark stain remained, a permanent mark on the hardwood Ethan had refinished himself 2 summers ago. She'd watched him work on those floors, spending his weekends sanding and staining while she went to yoga classes and brunches. She complained about the dust, the smell, the inconvenience of not being able to use the kitchen properly. He'd apologized and worked faster, trying to minimize her discomfort. When had she become the kind of person who complained about her husband improving their home? The doorbell rang again, and Melissa's stomach clenched. Another delivery? More evidence of her failing marriage? She checked the peephole and saw a man in a suit holding an official-looking folder. Melissa Cole? I'm here to serve you with legal documents. Her hands shook as she signed for the divorce papers. The process server was professional, but not unkind, explaining that she had 30 days to respond and suggesting she contact an attorney as soon as possible. After he left, Melissa spread the papers across the kitchen counter. The language was formal and emotionless, reducing 7 years of marriage to a series of asset divisions and custody arrangements. There were no children to fight over, no shared businesses to split, no real complications beyond the stark disparity in their financial situations. Reading through the documents, Melissa realized how little she'd known about her husband's life. Investment accounts she'd never heard of, business partnerships that had never been mentioned, real estate holdings in her own name that she didn't remember signing for. One document caught her attention, a timeline of material changes in marriage dynamic with dates, descriptions, and supporting evidence. It read like a forensic analysis of their relationship's decay, starting with small incidents she'd forgotten and building to the wine bar confrontation. March 15, 2022, Mrs. Cole publicly dismissed Mr. Cole's career advice at the Henderson dinner party stating, "My husband thinks everyone should invest like it's 1995. June 3, 2022. Mrs. Cole flirted extensively with the contractor renovating their kitchen while Mr. Cole was present, including physical contact and suggestive comments about skilled hands. September 10, 2022, Mrs. Cole told friends at a restaurant, while Mr. Cole was in attendance, that she married for stability, not passion, and would handle the passion part herself. The list went on for pages. Each entry was meticulously documented, with witness statements, photographs, or audio recordings. Melissa read about herself as if reading about a stranger, a woman who seemed intent on humiliating and undermining her husband at every opportunity. Had she really said those things? Done those things? The evidence suggested she had, but the woman in these reports seemed like a caricature, a villain in someone else's story. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The door is right there. Chapter 10, Public Fallout. Monday morning hit Melissa like a physical force. She'd spent the weekend alternating between fury and disbelief, calling friends who seemed mysteriously unavailable and leaving increasingly desperate voicemails for lawyers who promised to get back to her soon. The law office of Peterson and Associates was intimidatingly professional. Melissa sat in the waiting area, clutching her purse and trying to project confidence she didn't feel. When the receptionist finally called her name, she was led to a conference room where 3 attorneys waited with stacks of documents. "Mrs. Cole," the lead attorney said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to discuss your response to the divorce filing. Have you retained counsel?" "I'm working on it." Melissa's voice sounded smaller than she'd intended. "I wanted to understand what I'm dealing with first. You're dealing with a very well-documented case for divorce based on emotional infidelity and breach of marital contract." The attorney opened a thick folder. "Your husband has provided extensive evidence supporting his claims." They walked through the evidence methodically. Video footage, financial records, witness statements from people Melissa had considered friends. Each piece of the puzzle painted a picture of a marriage where one party had been systematically dishonest, while the other had been quietly gathering evidence. "What are my options?" Melissa asked when they'd finished. The attorneys exchanged glances. "Frankly, Mrs. Cole, your options are limited. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad. The evidence of emotional infidelity is overwhelming, and your husband's financial disclosure reveals assets that were carefully protected before and during the marriage. But I contributed to the marriage. I was a wife for 7 years. And you'll receive what the prenuptial agreement specifies for a marriage of this duration with these circumstances. It's not generous, but it's legal." Melissa left the meeting feeling hollowed out. 7 years of her life, reduced to a legal calculation that left her with less than the cost of her car. At work, the whispers followed her everywhere. The wine bar incident had become office gossip, embellished and exaggerated with each retelling. By lunch, the story had evolved into a dramatic love triangle with her as the femme fatale and Ethan as the wronged husband who'd finally snapped. "I heard Ryan got fired for maltreatment," her coworker Jennifer whispered during their coffee break. "Something about a pattern of inappropriate behavior with married clients." "It wasn't maltreatment," Melissa said automatically, then realized how defensive she sounded. "Oh, honey, I'm not judging." "We've all been there." Jennifer's sympathy felt patronizing. "But maybe next time, keep it more private. The whole bar saw what happened." Private? As if the problem was the public nature of her humiliation, rather than the humiliation itself. Melissa's phone buzzed with a social media notification. Someone had tagged her in a photo, and her stomach dropped as she recognized the image. It was from Saturday night, her and Ryan at another bar after the emergency room, looking intimate and conspirative. The caption read, "Some people move fast, #Dramalama #divorce party." The comments were brutal. Friends and strangers alike weighing in on her marriage, her choices, her character. The narrative had already been written. She was the cheating wife who'd driven her patient husband to violence. But as she scrolled through the responses, one comment made her stop cold. It was from Claire Henderson, a woman Melissa barely knew from Ethan's work functions. "Actually met Ethan's girlfriend this weekend. She seems lovely, accomplished, genuine, and clearly smitten. Good for him for moving on so quickly." Girlfriend? Melissa's hands trembled as she clicked on Claire's profile, looking for more information. There, posted just 2 hours ago, was a photo of Ethan and a stunning brunette at what appeared to be an upscale restaurant. They were holding hands across the table, both smiling genuinely at each other. The woman was everything Melissa wasn't, professionally dressed but not trying too hard, beautiful in an understated way, looking at Ethan like he was the most interesting person in the room. The caption read, "When you meet someone who sees your worth immediately, some people just know quality when they find it." Melissa stared at the photo until her eyes burned. Ethan looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy in a way she couldn't remember seeing him in years. His smile was the one she'd fallen in love with in college, before she'd systematically trained him to be more careful, more accommodating, more apologetic. "You okay?" Jennifer asked, noticing Melissa's expression. "Fine," Melissa lied, closing the app and shoving her phone into her purse. But she wasn't fine. For the first time since the wine bar incident, she was beginning to understand that this wasn't a temporary fight that would blow over with the right apology. This was permanent, final, irreversible. Ethan had moved on, completely, efficiently, and with someone who apparently appreciated what Melissa had spent years taking for granted. The charity gala was supposed to be Melissa's chance to show the world that she was handling her divorce with grace and dignity. She'd bought a new dress with money she couldn't afford, had her hair and makeup professionally done, and practiced her talking points about conscious uncoupling and mutual respect. What she hadn't expected was to see Ethan there with his new girlfriend. They entered the ballroom like they belonged together. Ethan in a perfectly fitted tuxedo, and the brunette from the social media photos wearing an elegant navy dress that probably cost more than Melissa's rent. They moved through the crowd with easy confidence, stopping to chat with people who genuinely seemed pleased to see them. Melissa watched from across the room as Ethan introduced his companion to colleagues and friends. His body language was completely different. Protective but not possessive. Proud but not showy. He looked like a man who'd found exactly what he'd been looking for. "That's her," someone whispered nearby. "The wife who cheated. I heard she was sleeping with multiple men. Can you blame him for moving on? She's gorgeous, and apparently she's some kind of financial genius." Total upgrade. Melissa's cheeks burned as she realized the whispers were about her, or rather, about Ethan's obvious happiness with someone else. She'd come to the gala hoping to salvage her reputation, but instead she was watching her replacement be welcomed into social circles that had suddenly become cold to her. The silent auction was in full swing when Melissa made her decision. She'd had 3 glasses of wine and just enough liquid courage to convince herself that a public confrontation was a good idea. She approached Ethan and his girlfriend at the auction table, her heart pounding but her chin held high. "Hello, Ethan." He turned, and for a moment she saw surprise flicker across his face. Then it was replaced by the polite, distant expression he might give a stranger. "Melissa, I didn't expect to see you here. It's a charity event." "I've always supported the arts." She turned to the brunette with a smile that felt like broken glass. "And you must be the rebound." The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she extended her hand with genuine warmth. "I'm Sarah Martinez." "You must be Melissa. Ethan's told me so much about you." The kindness in Sarah's voice was worse than hostility would have been. Melissa shook her hand automatically, thrown off by the lack of cattiness or defensiveness. "Has he?" Melissa's voice carried an edge she couldn't suppress. "I'm sure he has plenty of stories." "Only good ones," Sarah said, and seemed to mean it. "He speaks very fondly of your early years together. College sweethearts, right?" That must have been a magical time. Melissa felt her prepared speech crumbling. She'd expected jealousy, competition, some sign that this new relationship was built on her failure. Instead, Sarah seemed genuinely sympathetic, as if Melissa were a beloved friend from Ethan's past rather than an enemy to be defeated. "Magical," Melissa repeated weakly. "Yes, I suppose it was." Ethan was watching this exchange with the detached interest of someone observing strangers. When Melissa looked at him directly, seeking some flicker of their shared history, she found nothing familiar in his eyes. "Well," Sarah said gently, "we should let you get back to your evening. The auction items look wonderful this year." "Actually," Melissa said, her voice rising slightly, "I'd like to speak with my husband privately." "Ex-husband," Ethan corrected quietly. "The papers were finalized yesterday." The words hit Melissa like a slap. "What?" "You didn't respond to the filing within the required time frame. Default judgment was issued. We're divorced, Melissa." People nearby were starting to stare. Melissa felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as she realized that while she'd been hoping for reconciliation, Ethan had been efficiently closing the door on their marriage. "You can't just..." "I needed more time to find a lawyer." "To understand, you had 30 days. Ethan's voice remained calm, professional. "The same amount of time you spent posting photos with Ryan and telling anyone who'd listen that I was controlling and jealous." Melissa's face flushed. She had done exactly that, spinning the wine bar incident into a story where she was the sufferer of an unstable husband. Now those same lies were preventing her from claiming she'd wanted to save the marriage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice cut through the ambient conversation, "we have a special last-minute addition to tonight's auction." Melissa turned toward the stage, grateful for any distraction from this disastrous conversation. "Mr. Ethan Cole has generously offered to match the highest bid on any item tonight, with the total donation being made in honor of his ex-wife, Melissa Cole, and her passionate support of the arts." The ballroom erupted in applause. Melissa's mouth fell open as she realized what Ethan had done. Every item she bid on, every cause she tried to support, would be doubled by his money and credited to her name. She would look like either a generous philanthropist spending his money or a bitter ex-wife unable to make her own contributions. "How thoughtful," Sarah murmured, and Melissa couldn't tell if she was being sarcastic or sincere. Ethan leaned closer to Melissa, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I told you this was only Act 1. Then he took Sarah's arm and walked away, leaving Melissa standing alone in the middle of the ballroom as people began approaching her to discuss the generous donation being made in her name. 3 months later, Melissa sat in her studio apartment, surrounded by boxes she still hadn't unpacked. The space was a far cry from the brownstone she'd shared with Ethan. Cramped, loud, with a radiator that clanged all night and neighbors who seemed to enjoy testing their sound system at inappropriate hours. The divorce settlement had been exactly what the prenuptial agreement specified: $50,000, her personal belongings, and her car. No alimony, no claim to Ethan's assets, no ongoing financial support. The lawyers had explained it with the cold efficiency of an accounting ledger. This is what you signed. This is what you get. Her social circle had evaporated with surprising speed. Friends who'd seemed supportive initially had grown tired of her bitterness and complaints. The narrative had solidified around her as the woman who'd thrown away a good marriage for momentary attention, and sympathy was in short supply. Ryan had disappeared entirely after losing his job. His LinkedIn profile showed he'd moved to Portland and taken a position with a smaller firm at significantly reduced pay. He'd blocked her on all social media platforms after she'd made the mistake of reaching out during a particularly lonely evening. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd destroyed her marriage chasing validation from men who vanished the moment the situation became inconvenient. Melissa's phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Despite her better judgment, she still followed Sarah Martinez, drawn to glimpses of the life that might have been hers if she'd made different choices. The latest post showed Ethan and Sarah at what appeared to be a company retreat. They were hiking together, both grinning and muddy, looking like they'd just completed some challenging trail. The caption read, "When your partner pushes you to be the best version of yourself. Grateful for adventures with this amazing man." The comments were full of heart emojis and congratulations. Melissa scrolled through them masochistically, reading praise for Ethan's kindness, Sarah's accomplishments, their obvious happiness together. One comment made her stop. "You two are proof that good people find each other eventually. Ethan deserves someone who sees his worth." The implication was clear. Melissa had been someone who didn't see his worth. And looking back honestly, that assessment was probably accurate. She closed the app and walked to her small kitchen, where a single photo sat on the counter. It was from their honeymoon in Italy, both of them laughing at some long-forgotten joke, young and optimistic and genuinely happy. Ethan's arm was around her waist, his expression full of love and possibility. When had she stopped seeing that man? When had his kindness become weakness in her eyes, his patience become passivity, his love become something to be taken for granted rather than treasured? The photo had survived the divorce because it was in her personal jewelry box, something Ethan's meticulous inventory had missed. She'd kept it not out of hope for reconciliation, but as evidence that they'd once been genuinely happy together. Melissa picked up the photo and studied her younger self. That woman had been excited about building a life with Ethan, had seen his steady nature as a foundation rather than a limitation. Somewhere along the way, she'd convinced herself that stability was boring and that she deserved more excitement, more attention, more everything. The realization came with painful clarity. She hadn't lost Ethan because he'd changed. She'd lost him because she had. Her phone rang, startling her from her reflection. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "How are you settling in, dear?" her mother asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Fine. It's an adjustment, but I'm managing. Your father and I were talking, and we think maybe it's time you considered what you want to do next. Not just with living arrangements, but with your life." Melissa almost laughed. What she wanted to do next was turn back time and make different choices. She wanted to be the woman who'd appreciated what she had instead of constantly looking for what she was missing. "I'm working on it," she said instead. "Good. You know, dear, sometimes life gives us exactly what we need, even when it's not what we thought we wanted." After they hung up, Melissa sat in the growing darkness of her small apartment and considered her mother's words. Maybe this was what she needed, the complete dismantling of a life built on taking good things for granted. Maybe starting over with nothing was the only way to learn what actually mattered. Outside her window, she could see couples walking together in the evening light, holding hands and talking quietly. Once, she and Ethan had been one of those couples. They'd walked through their neighborhood on summer evenings, making plans and sharing dreams and believing they had all the time in the world. Melissa put the honeymoon photo face down on the counter and began unpacking the boxes she'd been avoiding. It was time to build a new life, one where she might eventually become someone worthy of the kind of love she'd thoughtlessly discarded. 6 blocks away, Ethan and Sarah were cooking dinner together in his downtown apartment, laughing about something that had happened at work. The sound of their happiness drifted through the open windows into the night, a reminder that life continued, love endured, and some people were wise enough to recognize treasure when they found it. Melissa had learned that lesson too late, but she'd learned it completely, and maybe, someday, that knowledge would be enough to build something better from the ruins of what she'd destroyed. As she folded her clothes into the small dresser, she found herself thinking not about what she'd lost, but about what kind of person she wanted to become. The woman who'd humiliated her husband in public was gone, buried under the weight of consequences she'd never imagined. In her place was someone smaller, quieter, and infinitely more aware of how quickly everything could change when you stopped paying attention to what mattered. It would have to be enough.